Our speaker today is Valerie Lewis, born and raised in the United Kingdom and traveled across Africa, South America, Japan, Soviet Union before settling in America over 50 years ago. Today, she will share some of her adventures with us, as she has done in the past with other programs. And 2 weeks from today, Mr. Lewis, also known as Dr. Mike, will be here doing his photographic travel experiences on all 7 continents. So with that, please welcome today's speaker, Valerie Lewis.
Yes, there. So you can hear me. Good.
Hi, Valerie.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me back. So I'm talking about Japan. So I made this map to begin with, just to show you the extent of my travels from Hokkaido in the north down to Kyushu, the most southerly island, and to the south of that island in a place called Kagoshima. So on April the 6th, 1970, the cargo ship Brazil Maru and its 100 passengers sailed into Nagoya Harbor after a voyage of 6 weeks from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I had taught there for 2 years, and while ostensibly on my way home to the UK, was now eager to explore Japan for as long as my meager funds would allow. On the ship, I had helped a group of young Japanese with their English, while they had tried to introduce me to some basic Japanese. Hidenori, a young man who had been traveling in South America, offered to show me some places of interest for my first few days off the ship before he went back to his classes. So this bronze Buddha in Kamakura weighs 120 tons and stands 40 feet tall and is in the open air. It is over 700 years old and was originally inside a temple, which was destroyed by typhoons and a huge tsunami. On another day, we visited the great shining white castle near Nagoya. Originally built in 1610 and completely destroyed in World War II, its replica is truly an amazing sight. There are several other such castles in the country, each massive and each stunning to see. Today, most are museums inside, housing exquisite art and historical objects. While Kyoto is a large modern city, it also has preserved many impressive temples and gardens, reached by walking through. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry, oh God, what did I do? I beg your pardon. Here we are. Oh, now I'm mixed up. First of all, I should say we went to Hiroshima, and that clearly is a hard place to visit. The museum at the Peace Park here, this building here was one of the few buildings during the atomic bomb attack that survived, if you can call that surviving. There were terrible fires as well as the bomb on August the 6th, 1945, particularly among young people who were already in the city cleaning up from previous bombing raids. The details of what happened are so hard to absorb, it's difficult to understand how the Japanese can even face British or American visitors. Hidenori was a charming young man who was eager to make the most of the opportunity I presented to help him improve his English. He was warm and generous, wanting to make my stay in his country as pleasant as possible. I met many Japanese like him. They would stop me on the street and offer to show me around or assist me in some way. Others would simply ask me lots of questions. However, the best thing Hidenori did for me was introduce me to his friend Yoshiko, a smiling, bright young woman of 23. She had offered to let me stay with her for as long as I was to be in Tokyo. She lived in a tiny room with a sink and gas ring in which she had managed to pack a minute refrigerator, a TV, a sewing machine, and her skis slung from the ceiling. When it was bedtime, we pulled out mattresses called futons from one of the cabinets and laid them on the tatami floor, which is made of woven grass matting. Across the hall was a toilet shared with 2 other rooms on the same floor. When Yoshiko got up in the morning to go to work, I had to get up as well to give her space to move. She worked in the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. She was a wizard on the soroban, or Japanese abacus. This tells you how long ago this was, using abacuses, and was preparing to take a national exam. She and Hidenori called me Sakura, or cherry blossom. Dear, no, stop. Cherry blossom, because I had arrived when the trees were in bloom and because my name Valerie is difficult for Japanese to pronounce. Several times a week, Yoshiko and I would each fill up an enamel bowl with soap, shampoo, a towel, and other toiletries, and walk up the road to the local baths, or called sento, dressed in our namaki, or bathrobes. There, in the women's section, after each of us left our clothes in a closet, we entered the washing area, where taps a foot off the ground lined the tiled walls. We picked up a small stool, settled in front of a tap, and began scrubbing ourselves. Yoshiko scrubbed my back, and I did the same for her. After shampooing our hair, we rinsed off with liberal amounts of water using our enamel bowls. Only then could we go into the bath area, where there was a large wooden tub with exceedingly hot water in which we sat and soaked for a long time. After I had talked to Japanese people and went on sightseeing trips, I began to realize that many Japanese wanted to learn English and that there was a need for teachers. From Yoshiko and Hidenori, I learned of schools where I might pick up some work. So I traveled around Tokyo, was interviewed in several places, and managed to end up with some part-time jobs. The school year was coming to an end anyway, so these positions would only be for about 6 weeks. I learned a little about the students by asking about their hobbies. In one classroom, one student was a lute player. Another recounted her travels in Russia and Europe. A third described her home in the northern island of Hokkaido, and another liked to practice the tea ceremony. One evening a week, I traveled out to a factory where the management required their employees to spend 2 hours in a class studying English. This was after a long day's work, so several would fall asleep. Mr. Namato loved Wagner's music, wanted to work in opera, and played the violin. Miss Sato was a history buff and wanted to get an office job. Miss Tago liked to play the koto, a large stringed instrument played horizontally. At another site, I was trying to help a group of businessmen who were soon to go to Indonesia and needed to brush up their English. When I didn't have a class, I would try to make the most of being in the huge city of Tokyo and all it had to offer. I went to watch sumo wrestling, where it turned out those men in the photos of sumo are not just round, they are very tall. The actual wrestling time is a mere minute, but sumo is an ancient Japanese sport connected to the Shinto religion, so purification rituals such as throwing salt in the ring occupy more time than the fight itself. Kabuki theater intrigued me with its tradition of men playing women's roles, its elaborate costumes, its depiction of life in Japan from 300 years ago, the formulaic dances, and the stylized pronunciation of speeches. But if kabuki seems stylized, no NOH theater goes even further. It has been performed continuously in the same way since the 14th century. It is a combination of song, dance, music, and poetry, in which masks such as this are used to convey the main emotion of each character. It is a combination of, performances last 6 hours. I didn't understand a word, but was transfixed. Bento boxes, like picnic meals, are provided and are eaten rather noisily by the audience during the lengthy production. The Imperial Palace sits in 200 acres in central Tokyo, comprised of numerous buildings, including the emperor's official residence. It's surrounded by parkland and exquisite gardens. I was fortunate to be in Tokyo when the iris as well as the cherry blossom were in bloom. One of my vivid memories of the palace gardens was a winding stream bordered by 150 species of tall iris plants, their blooms of every hue from glistening white to deepest black. Yoshiko and I would go out at the weekends, sometimes to meet friends or to go to a market or a movie. One Sunday, we went to a suburb where, in the grounds of a museum, we entered one house and knelt on the tatami mats. We ate a small cake and drank some powdered tea from a ceramic bowl. We admired the bowl, the Buddhist quotation on the side of the bowl, and the lacquer bowl containing the powdered tea and bamboo spoon. There was a script we read describing this particular school of tea ceremony, as well as our teacher, the flowers in the alcove, the pottery, and other instruments used. The ceremony took about 25 minutes, by which time my legs were numb. We carefully stepped out of the house and went down a winding path to another house, where a different school practiced a slightly different ceremony. There, you could pick up your own cake, but must be careful to return the chopsticks in exactly the right position. All this requires great discipline, observance of small details, sensitivity to art, and knowledge of the history of this integral part of Japanese culture. Some claim it is their hobby. On 2 occasions, when all Yoshiko's china and glasses rattled loudly, I learned what earth tremors feel like. Another time in a youth hostel, I was woken up thinking I must be in a bus on a very bumpy road. However, I seemed to be the only one who took any notice. It was now July and the school year was coming to an end. I was excited to travel north to the island of Hokkaido and south to the island of Kyushu, where Yoshiko's family lived. I had decided to try hitchhiking, even though it was an unfamiliar activity in Japan. Not everyone understood what I was doing with my thumb sticking out. They sometimes tried to take me to a train or a bus station, but quite often they went out of their way to take me to the next town or to the youth hostel. Many bought me food or drink. In my diary at that time, I wrote that I traveled through fine mountainous country with deep valleys, the gorge of the river Tone, suspension bridges, rock-strewn riverbeds, and densely wooded hillsides, all with lush green vegetation. At the Tsuchitaru Youth Hostel, I was the only guest because it was in ski country and this was summer. Farther north, the road bordered the rocky shore of the Sea of Japan on the west side of Japan until it turned to the east where the land flattened out into paddy fields of rice. I was heading to Aomori. Wait a minute. Let's see. I was heading to Aomori. Let me see if I can make this work now. Up here, where I was going to take a ferry across to Hokkaido. Wait a minute. As I was heading to Aomori and the farthest tip of the island of Honshu, Aomori claims to have the highest snowfall in the world, sometimes as much as 12 feet. The ferry goes from Aomori to the island of Hokkaido, where the Winter Olympics have since been held, where Sapporo beer is brewed, and where there are brown bears. I loved the unspoiled scenery of mountains, lakes, and fields with cows and horses. When I arrived at a youth hostel near a mountain puffing smoke and steam, I decided to explore it, having taught many students in my geography classes about fumaroles or steam vents occurring in volcanic areas. As I climbed up the mountain, the smell of sulfur became stronger and stronger. All of a sudden, around a corner, I saw a man soaking in a wooden bathtub. He was directly in my path, and I didn't know the protocol required when encountering naked men in bathtubs on volcanoes. Eventually, I scuttled past him and was surprised when he said, "Hello." I raced on, walked higher, found an active fumarole where the steam was coming out, and laid the eggs I had bought for dinner right on the steam vent. This was an experiment. When I opened them later in the youth hostel, I found the whites had cooked, but even geothermal heat had not cooked the yolks. In this youth hostel and another in a fairly remote spot, I was called on the phone by name. This was a stratagem of the local high school English teacher in order to practice his English. He had persuaded the hostel manager to let him know when an English speaker arrived. I was then invited for dinner and peppered with questions. The native people, and there's some more scenery from Hokkaido. The native people of Hokkaido are called Ainu. They came before the Japanese and have a distinct culture which I learned about in 2 museums. Similar to tribes in the Northwest US, they rely on fish, seals, bear, and deer for food and clothing. Although they have their own language called Ainu, decades of assimilation have left very few native speakers. Hokkaido was often chilly, especially in the pouring rain. But as I headed south once more along the east coast of Honshu, I got warmer. I stopped in Tokyo to join a birthday party for my wonderful friend Yoshiko, and then pushed on to the tropical weather of Kyushu. Wait a minute. So here's another map to show you. Now I am down in, let me see, here, down in Kyushu. Here's Nagasaki. I'm heading for Kagoshima, and Mount Asu, I'm going to talk about, is in here. So I joined a group of students going up Mount Asu there to see the enormous caldera, which some claim to be the largest in the world. Down in its depths, there was lava bubbling and spitting while smoke swirled above. Mount Aso last erupted in 2021. Nearby are geysers, and pools of red, blue, or clear water, all steaming at 170 degrees Fahrenheit, similar to those of Yellowstone Park. And some of the towns there have spas where people go to take the hot waters and bathe, and this is what they look like. Now, wait a minute, I should go back. I skipped. I was in Nagasaki on August the 9th, the 25th anniversary of the atomic bomb attack, when a bell tolled at 11:02 and the city came to a halt. I got these all mixed up. I don't know why. Sorry. The city fell silent. I could see an enormous Mitsubishi factory, many other such structures, and the large shipyards. All, of course, the reason for Nagasaki as a target for the atom bomb. My one-of-a-kind story is the day I came across the jungle bath. Overlooking a beach, it was like a huge indoor botanical garden with pools, waterfalls, streams, and palm trees. It was mixed bathing, and most people were naked, carrying only a small towel in front of them when they moved from a hot pool to a waterfall to a cool pool. Since I was moving out to the beach and then inside again, I wore my swimsuit. I last reached Kagoshima in the far south. I sat reading outside the bus station while waiting to be picked up by Yoshiko's family. And I found myself brushing my book several times to remove what I thought was dust. Then I realized it was ash from the nearby Sakurajima volcano. Later that night, what I thought was rain outside was more ash falling. The Yamashita family were very generous and kind, showing me the town and its museums and offering me delicious meals. I was thrilled when Mrs. Yamashita presented me with a yukata robe she had made. Now it was time to head back to Tokyo and prepare for my departure. I had a ticket for the MS Baikal on August the 20th, and there were a lot of farewells and thank yous to say. I boarded the ship in Yokohama. I don't know if I can see Yokohama way down over. Oh dear, wait a minute. Where is it? Now I've lost it again. Oh, way down over in the far right. And this is the Soviet Union. And I wanted to show you this map, even though you can't read most of the names, to give you an idea of the journey I was about to take, which was over about 2,400 miles from one side to Moscow. Vladivostok, the official start of the Trans-Siberian Railroad, bristles with military personnel and equipment. So travelers are taken on a local line to Khabarovsk up the coast to connect with the official Trans-Siberian train. We were going to be on the train for 3 nights and 2.5 days. It soon became apparent that all 5 of us foreigners were going to be not only in the same carriage, but in the same compartment, and the other 4 were men. Alberto from Bolivia was studying chemistry at Moscow University. When we talked, he translated into Spanish, which I translated into English for the 2 Americans, one of whom had a Japanese mother. So he was able to translate from English into Japanese for the Japanese traveler. And we spent nearly 3 days doing that all the time to talk. We rolled along at a gentle rate through lovely undulating country and silver birch woods, stopping at the little stations in towns where the wooden houses had carvings round the windows and roofs. In the stations, women were selling pickled cucumbers, tomatoes, carrots, and bottles of milk. When we reached the city, so we passed this kind of thing with trees everywhere. When we reached, I wish I could make this work. Why doesn't this work? Sorry. When we reached Irkutsk, which is approximately in the middle of the map here, and it's a very large city. No, lost it. We got out of the train and had a guide and a minivan which took us around town and then out into the woods. We even stopped to pick wild raspberries in the sunshine before arriving on the shores of Lake Baikal that you can see there on the map. It is the deepest lake in the world, and in some parts reaches 4,000 feet down. It's 395 miles long, which compares with Lake Michigan, which is 307. On our return to Irkutsk, we were offered last-minute tickets for the opera Rusalka. Walking back to the hotel after a beautiful performance, we were beckoned to join a wedding party where we danced and drank merrily. It all seemed very casual and easygoing, unlike what I expected the USSR to be. Next morning, we were on the train heading for Novosibirsk. That's Lake Baikal. There. And we traveled through areas that looked like this, little towns that had geese and chickens on the road, and very primitive, really, houses. So Novosibirsk in the middle there is the 3rd largest city in Russia, was at that time very proud of its science center on its outskirts, where I was taken on a tour by Natasha. I was shown numerous institutes, such as one of organic and then inorganic chemistry, another of geology and geophysics, nuclear physics, and so on. There were fine apartment blocks and villas for those working there. Scientists came from all over the world for meetings. In spite of this tour to impress me, Natasha couldn't resist stopping at a department store on our way back to buy herself some nail polish. I now took a detour from Novosibirsk and flew south to Uzbekistan, in the lower left of this map here. And I went to the city of Samarkand. I flew through Tashkent and then to the city of Samarkand. I wanted to see the tomb of the Emperor Timurlane, who was a grandson of Genghis Khan. For years, I had been fascinated by his story. Built in 1404, the tomb is of black jade from Mongolia and is surrounded by beautifully decorated mosques. Like this. It's a wonderful place. Back in Novosibirsk, I jumped back on the train heading for Moscow. Of course, there was much to see. So here's the map from the last part of this. And of course, I'm sure you've all seen that in Red Square and the Kremlin, both inside and outside, St. Basil's Cathedral, and not least the subway. This is the subway with chandeliers, brilliant paint, fine mosaics, marble pillars, and not one cigarette butt or piece of paper on the ground. I met up with Alberto, the Bolivian from the train ride, and we went to a superb ballet at the Bolshoi Theater. Sorry. Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, was beautiful with its canals and bridges reminiscent of Venice. I visited the Winter Palace here. It's enormous. The official residence of the Tsars until 1917, and this is where the revolution really started in this square, and now housing the extraordinary and vast Hermitage Museum. From the museum, I took a hydrofoil out to this summer palace of the Tsars. This is just their summer home. On the Gulf of Finland. While I could not get inside because of very long lines on that Sunday afternoon, I'm glad I saw the lakes, waterfalls, fountains, orangeries, and gardens, which gave me an idea of the opulence of the palace. The next day, a tour of the interiors of Pushkin and then Pavlovsk, other palaces, revealed the extraordinary lavish lives of the Tsars. Every door handle, floor, light, ceiling, chandelier, and piece of furniture was exquisitely carved and a work of art. But what astonished me was during the siege of Leningrad in World War II, these palaces had been occupied by the Nazis. And when they left, they tossed grenades into the rooms where they had already used the furniture for firewood. So then the Soviet government then carefully and at enormous expense restored every detail to its earlier magnificence. So the following day, I was on the MS Ostania, sailing to Helsinki, Copenhagen, and Tilbury in London, where I arrived on September the 12th. And that was the end of my saga. Odyssey.
Thank you, Valerie. Ernie, would you see if there are questions from our audience for our guest speaker?
Question, Ben?
Well, first of all, that was very interesting and you traveled alone some of the times. Is that right?
Oh, yes, all the time.
All the time. Did any of the Japanese people, this is 25 years after the end of World War II. Did any of the people in Japan that you met want to discuss the war with you?
Not that I met, no. And I did say, that I was surprised that the Japanese would even tolerate me in a way after the bomb. But yeah, they accepted people visiting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, we went to a Japanese funeral this weekend
Oh.
and were shocked by how little resentment they had. They start talking about the person who died, and there's, oh yes, she was born in the concentration camp, and then her mother's lived in the concentration camp, and they just accepted what happened, and I was very surprised about it.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, because those camps were terrible. Yes.
Valerie, did you have the opportunity to visit any of those locations afterward in recent, more
Yes,
after
I've
that?
been back with my husband, Michael, and we did visit quite a lot of those places. Yes.
Did you see any significant difference? Were you treated any differently, or did you recognize any differences? I imagine people would see differences if they came to America 50 years ago and today. But when you went to these different lands and different cities, were there any significant changes that you could share?
Well, there was the bullet train for a start, and a lot more large buildings and skyscrapers and so on.
But that was in the buildings. I just wondered about yes, about the people.
No, I don't think so.
So people were people, and you were
Yes,
treated.
people. Yes, I mean, maybe if I'd spent, a week or more with a family or something, I might have observed differences, but just casually meeting people, no.
And I get the sense that there was kind of a universality even between Russia and Japan and the northern and the southern, as far as people being people and not significant. You were treated right.
Oh, I'm not sure I know what to say about that, because that was the middle of the Cold War. It was 25 years after the Second World War, and we were deep into the Cold War. And I was thinking, I'm not sure the ship that I traveled on from Yokohama to the Soviet Union, I have no recollection now of why it was doing that. I assume it was a cargo ship, but what it would have been taking, I don't know.
If you were to pick one spot that you said, I wish I could go back, is there one? I mean, we've asked this of musicians, and they say, well, you're asking me to pick who's my favorite child, and I'm not going to do it.
Yes.
Can you tell us which one stood out for you that you'd say, I wish I could go back?
Oh, I wish I could go back to it all. I suppose the temples in Kyoto, um, and the countryside is beautiful. And all these other things that I saw, kabuki theater, no theater, the sumo, I was fascinated by all that. And I would go and sit again for 6 hours in a no performance, even though I don't understand a word. That was all intriguing because it was new to me.
Any other questions from our, here is. Were you allowed to speak to Russian citizens? And if so, were they somewhat reluctant to speak to you due to the probably surveillance going on at that point?
Oh,
in
I
Russia?
think there was subtle surveillance, which is why they put the 5 foreigners. We were 5 foreigners on this huge long train, and we were all in the same compartment, not just carriage, but compartment. So obviously there was somebody watching somewhere. And I do remember getting off the train and trying to take a photograph of the train, and somebody immediately said, "Niet," wasn't allowed to. However, I mentioned that we went to the opera on the spur of the moment, and then on the way home, there was a wedding party going on, and they all said, come on in. And we were welcomed in and drank with them and had danced and had a good time. So, but that was in Siberia. And I think as I traveled further and further west to Moscow and then St. Petersburg, there was more, I think, more surveillance. And definitely in hotels. Because I've been back to I went back to the Soviet Union in the 80s a couple of times. And you knew that there were microphones in the bedrooms. And there would be ladies at, near the elevator on each floor where you had to check in and get your key. And she, of course, was keeping track of who was coming in and who was going out. So there was surveillance. But on the other hand, you know, we went into the store and bought nail polish, and we picked raspberries in the forest. And
Were you on any tours in which a minder was sort of leading the group?
was there what? Sorry?
Well, from my recollection of the history of Russia at that point, or Soviet Union, typically foreign people had a what was called a minder, or somebody that was Soviet agent,
Yeah.
to ensure that you did not go to certain places or talk to certain people or talk politics or anything else.
Yes, well, I had a guide to go around Novosibirsk and the university, and I'm sure she was trained by the security people. You know, they knew who was traveling where and what they were doing, for sure. Yeah.
How long did your trip take, and what kind of luggage did you carry? What did you bring with you?
I just had one piece, a rucksack, and that's all I had. My whole trip from Japan to Britain, well, it was the train trip and then probably about 2 weeks total, 2.5 weeks. Not that long. So No, back there. Oh, there's somebody back. Oh,
Thank you. Valerie, very interesting. About 4 years ago, I discovered a Japanese international broadcast channel, NHK World Japan.
oh,
And I feel like I've earned, it's like any addiction. It started with the 15-minute news program hourly. Then I didn't change the channel. And before you knew it, I was recording almost every program. It's, all these travel logs. I mean, through this, I have been via a camera on a helmet. I have cycled all around Japan.
oh,
It's just fabulous. It's NHK World Japan. They
oh,
interview the artisans and take you into all the little provinces and all the gorgeous places. I'm going to be 2 weeks from today, I'm going to be heading towards Tokyo and doing a cruise around Honshu for about 12 days. I hope I'm not disappointed because I feel like I've explored every aspect of
Right.
Japan already. So I highly recommend that for anybody who's a Japanophile. But thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Well, while Arnie's going to another question, we have a chat question from Diane. As a single woman, did you ever feel unsafe in any area you traversed?
No, I did not. And I hitchhiked.
You felt safe.
I felt safe. And I hitchhiked everywhere.
Yes, thank you. You got your morning exercise coming over to me. Valerie, thank you so much for sharing this adventure. And I know travel is your passion. With regard to this specific trip, could you share with us any wisdom, any perceptions with regard to your worldview, any ways in which your experiences and the relationships you made have altered you?
Oh, have altered me. Well, I'm very aware of the rest of the world and that there are people everywhere who are people like us, but who have very different customs and rituals and interests. And it's sobering when you travel. Even in Japan at that time, I remember seeing some very poor people. One doesn't think of that so much, and maybe, I don't know today, but I do remember seeing out in the country very poor people. And I've certainly seen extremely poor people in other parts of the world. And that's very sobering, and it keeps one's life here in, teaches us to remember that. And I go down the aisle in the grocery store and look at all the cereals in a complete aisle. And I think, there are people in the world who, if they had one little tablespoon of the cereal from one packet, they would be thrilled to bits.
Given this extraordinary life that you've led, crossing the Sahara Desert and teaching in South America and living in Japan, and would you agree that whoever got to marry you would be an incredibly lucky person?
That's a jaded question here.
Yeah, this is a loaded question from my husband.
Yes, and the doctor, very smart man, a very wise man. Happy wife, happy life. We have another question. We've had 42 at least 42 people, maybe doubles in some cases on Zoom.
Oh,
But Sarah Cyril has her hand up,
Oh.
and I've muted her. Sarah, do you wish to ask a question? Go ahead, please. We can hear you if you talk.
Is this from Sarah Searle? It's actually from Simon Searle.
Simon Searle.
Have you maintained contact with Yoshko?
I'm still in touch with Yoshko, yes. She lives now in California, in San Diego. Yes.
Oh, right.
And she sends me a calendar every year. And yes, we're still in touch after all these years.
But you didn't maintain contact with anybody from on your train ride to Moscow?
No. Only because I just couldn't keep up with all these wonderful people I met. I would love to keep in touch, but and it takes a while for the letters to go and then come back.
Yeah, in the late 70s, I had some of the same experiences with traveling all over Japan, doing business. I was a businessman, and and one time in Tokyo, I had meetings with the chairman of 3 different big steel companies. I was trying to work a deal, and the thing I noticed is I never saw any hostility at all. One period on a weekend, I was taking a train up to a shop, and a man with his family was there, and we talked, and he was very friendly, and he excused we went to the same store, he excused his family and came with me. He wanted to show me exactly what I wanted. I've never seen such kindness. And when I got home, he sent me gifts. Very unusual. I found the people very, very.
Yeah, they love giving gifts.
Very, very nice. And to Americans, the biggest problem I had was that with businessmen, they somehow think everyone wants to be with a geisha girl. And I had to you have to find ways to politely refuse and avoid that. And it's very difficult, very clumsy. Thank you.
Bob's right here. Valerie? One more.
I have another question. How aware were the people you met in Japan of the wonderful Japanese American soldiers and the fact that so many they have an interest in immigrating to the United States to join their Japanese counterparts. You understand the Japanese, let me just say it this way. The Japanese Americans at the beginning of World War II were mistreated and put into concentration camps.
Right.
Ultimately, their sons joined the army in the hope that they could get them out before the war, but they didn't. Did they have any, maybe afterwards, admiration for these sons and families and maybe thinking about immigrating to the United States?
I really can't answer that. I don't know any of them. I wouldn't know. But you're saying that the sons are living in Japan. They're living here.
The sons of the American who lived here at the start of World War II.
Yes.
Joined the U.S. Army.
Yes.
And fought gallantly. The best soldiers, they took the most casualties, won the most awards, because they wanted to get their families out of the concentration camps. And I just wanted to say, we're aware of that and maybe thought, wow, maybe I should immigrate now after the war to the US. They seem like.
I really can't answer that because I'm sorry. I don't know anything about it.
Valerie, thank you so much, folks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much.